Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Super excited to bring you another episode of The Innovative Mindset. Today, I have a very special guest, my first guest from Trinidad Tobago. I have Sharan Chandradev Singh. How are you doing, Sharan?
I'm doing great, Harrison. It's good to be on the show today.
I'm super excited to have you. So, for those not familiar, Sharan is working at Minerva, which is a very forward-thinking approach to education of varying levels, which I'm very excited to get into. And he is the director of strategic partnerships. Sharan, would you kind of just take a moment to walk me through what you're doing at Minerva and what makes it a forward-thinking organization that you're a part of?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So my role as the managing director of strategic partnerships, and we were very intentional in coming up with that title, is to really lead the building of an ecosystem of collaborations between Minerva and the outside world. And it is that broad because we're working with governments, corporations, universities, colleges, even high schools. We have a really exciting new project where we're trying to reinvent the high school degree. And so my specific role spans that. It's engaging in conversations and trying to formulate partnerships where we can use the best of what we have done at Minerva over the last 8 years or so to help uplift, advance, and really transform the world of education for all learners. And then to your second part of the question, which is about Minerva, it's Minerva Project is the organization. And Minerva Project was started in San Francisco by a gentleman named Ben Nelson. It's going on being 8 years old now. And although young relatively in the grander scheme of the educational sphere, where a lot of institutions, their currency comes from being a bazillion years old, Minerva is tiny. We're young, right? But we've punched above our weight. We've gotten a lot of notoriety, a lot of public visibility and scrutiny. And that's because of how distinct our approach has been to education. And, it really started off in the early days of Minerva, right at the genesis at the beginning, by the core team focusing on, what is learning? What does the science say about learning? There's tons of research on what learning science, what learning should be about, how it should be delivered, what works from a physiological perspective, how the brain works to absorb information and retain information, from a social perspective, from an economic perspective, from a cultural perspective. And rather than sort of incrementally evolve what others have been doing, which is generally the case in education, people sort of build on precedent. So it used to be done this way. How can I tweak it slightly to make it a bit more advanced? Minerva wiped the slate clean, white blank page, and said, let's build according to what the contemporary science says. So they had a deep dive into the science, and then from there built something that was really intentional. And if there was one decisive move, it was that. It was the ability to actually build what the science said works. But the key was to be able to articulate that and really make sure that it's an integrated approach, so that curriculum design, instructional design, technology were all working in a very concerted and coordinated manner. And really what it has resulted in is some very early but substantial success. The first 5 years of Minerva was spent building the Minerva schools at KGI, which is our university, basically. And the Minerva schools at KGI, in a very short time frame, started to build traction with students across the globe. And today, our acceptance rate is 0.8%. We get over 25,000 applications for a very small handful of spots. And that has all happened through students having a need to do something distinct and different and contemporary, something that's future oriented. It is something that has grown consistently year by year. Within an incoming class at Minerva, there's upwards of 40, 50 different nationalities. So it's minority American. It's truly global. Of the incoming class, over 80% are on some form of financial assistance. So it's socioeconomically very diverse as well. So it's an incredible laboratory that we have worked on very intentionally for a number of years. And after iterating on the science, updating the curriculum, changing the technology, adjusting the pedagogy, about 2 years ago, we started to collaborate. And our collaboration agenda stems from our mission. The mission of Minerva Project is to nurture critical wisdom for the sake of the world. Now that, at first glance, sounds quite altruistic and broad, but it's something that really drives our decision making in a very substantial way. It is a tether against which we base our decisions. And we knew from, the founding team, and Ben in particular, knew that you couldn't nurture global critical wisdom in a highly selective American school, no matter how broad the access to it, no matter how egalitarian it is. It's still small numbers. It's like 600 students at a time going through the process. But really, that was the school was the precursor to the real agenda of now enabling other institutions to learn from our science. And that's where partnerships came from. And I joined Minerva in January last year, which was in the early days of our partnerships. And we're still quite early, to be honest. But what has happened to us in the last 6 months is we've seen growth in the number of sort of, interest and the number of partnerships in multiple folds, where we probably would have been few years from now. We saw growth over the last few months, and it's been fascinating. So let me stop there. I just give you a very broad overview of what I do and what Minerva is all about.
It's definitely fascinating. COVID was kind of out of left field, but it definitely has advanced innovation. I've been working remote all along with my job, and I've been saying since I started, like, this is the future of work. But obviously, I couldn't have anticipated how quickly it would become the new normal. So I totally understand how this kind of threw you for a loop. It sounds like you joined the organization at the right time. But taking it a step back, something that is really interesting that you talked about briefly now, that we also chatted about the first time that we spoke, is the science behind education. It's something that I've always found really fascinating, the art of learning. And I've been I ended up at multiple colleges, and the distinctions between the education quality at one of my institutions versus the previous institution, it was like day and night different. And it made such a substantial impact on me as a person. So I understand the value of good education. So I want to kind of formulate it as, what issues did Ben identify when he decided to start Minerva? And what were some of the most telling things that you found in the science that you guys have spent so much time researching?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know, caveat, but I am by no means an expert in learning science, but I work with incredibly brilliant people that are experts in learning science, and I collaborate with them every day. And I have sort of via osmosis absorbed a lot of what I've learned today. But actually, maybe I'm underselling it. It's the substance of our conversations with partners, right? Really, it's not about technology. We are not a technology company. We're very intentional about framing ourselves that way. We are an educational company that has a very unique technological tool that partners license. It's a very sophisticated synchronous learning environment called Forum. But that was built upon the science that you spoke about. And, early on, it's an interesting story how Ben came up with the idea about Minerva. It's when he was an undergraduate at Penn. Ben was terribly dissatisfied with what he was learning and how he was learning. He said it was irrelevant. The methodology was poor. It was, not engaging. And he, started to thrash out ideas even as an undergraduate, and it fell upon deaf ears. Nobody was interested because, the currency of higher education, or education in general, as I mentioned earlier, is longevity and consistency and dependability and predictability to a large extent, and the ability to deliver a consistent product to the market. And that's counterintuitive to the environment in which we live today. That's like an industrial revolution or even pre-industrial revolution perspective on things. And so you had to learn differently back then. When you came into a job and you stayed in a company for 50 years and you worked yourself up steadily, the world has shifted around. I mean, not just in the world of jobs, but in education. People are, like you even did, jump between institutions. Now you can have stackable certificates and diplomas. Now Google's launched a $20 degree or whatever it is recently. The world is upside down in relation to education, and there's a big focus on return on investment. And so therefore, higher education in particular, it's for a long time coming. Organizations and the leaders of organizations have understood the need for transformation, to adapt the curriculum and update it, and to change the teaching methodology and to infuse technology. And what COVID did was just literally, put that times 100, the speed, right? It just sped everything up. But irrespective of the technology or COVID or any of that, what we know from a science of learning perspective is that certain things don't work and certain things work. And so I'll explain it by explaining how we teach and learn within a Minerva environment. First thing we know is that sort of unidirectional lectures don't work. You might be able to absorb some of the information, you'll retain none of it.
And
right?
can you just expand? How would you define that term that you just used? What was it?
Unidirectional. Well, there's a saying, chalk and talk. The professor turns his
Uh,
back to the classroom and just starts
reading
talking,
from the textbook
or whatever, right? I mean,
or the PowerPoint.
and even there's a social construct in here. The professor is coming in and saying, I, as the professor who have a lot of experience because of the number of years that I've thought about this or interacted with it, know the absolute truth. And here it is. And if I say this is red, if you say that's pink, no, you're wrong. It's red, right? Full stop. And so the education system is really sort of blunt force traumaing you into compliance, quite frankly. That's what it's all about, right? And we know, for example, that when you learn for a specific application, so like if I'm being taught a concept over a semester for a test or a midterm or a final or something like that, I'm going to retain it for that purpose. And when that purpose has passed, I will not retain it. Anybody you ask today, bar maybe Minerva students, you ask them what they learned, like tell me the specifics of your calculus class or your physics, no clue, man. People can't recall that stuff because it was taught in an insufficient manner, in an inappropriate manner.
I
And
certainly
so,
can't say much Spanish after 12 years of 12 years in high school or in public school, and then a couple years in college. Still me no hablo. So
yeah,
that's validation right there. I did good on the test though.
tienes que practicar. Y eso es un ejemplo muy bien. So I learned Spanish, and it's a perfect example. I went to high school in India. I went to an American school in India. I lived and did my undergraduate in California, and then I lived in Miami after that. And I took Spanish as a class. If I didn't live in Miami and LA, I would have forgotten all my high school Spanish. Living in the environment, practicing it, applying it, getting real-time feedback from native speakers, being like, no, that's not how you pronounce it. This is now it's muscle memory. It's deep in my memory. And actually, that is a perfect example of how learning works. You have to have, first of all, you can't have just chalk and talk, unidirectional, professing the ultimate truth. You have to allow students, first of all, at their own pace, because everybody learns differently, to absorb information. And so asynchronously, the way we do it is students come on to the learning environment and there'll be readings, there'll be videos to watch, there'll be pre-class assignments, and one person might do it in an hour, one person might do it in 3 hours, but it's fully up to them to absorb the information at their own pace, however whatever works for them. When you come now to class, and this is the difference, the classroom environment is an opportunity to demonstrate not just comprehension, but to demonstrate application. So you curate that class session to enable the students in that class to actually apply what they learned. And then I think the most critical part of it is to get real-time feedback, first from their peers and also from the instructor. So now if I learned Spanish in the classroom in India, I would have never retained a thing of Spanish. I mean, where would I have practiced my Spanish in a real world setting, right? It's like an athlete. Unless you play in a live game, you can practice and be in the gym and theaterize all you want. Once you get on the pitch and you start, and somebody's coming at you and you have to do something, that's when you really, it gets embedded very deeply. And the same thing with learning. When you're in the classroom or you're in a city having to apply that language and speak Spanish, for example, then it's going to now actually give you a depth of understanding and retention that you would not have had before. And so another important concept within all of this is the social sort of component of learning. If I feel like, if I'm disengaged, I'm not interested, or even have fear because of personality, maybe I'm an introvert or whatnot, I'm never going to feel comfortable applying or more comfortable applying than if I'm with my peers in a safe environment. So like, in the Minerva classroom, the instructor really kind of stands back and takes a big step back and allows the students to engage. They're almost like an orchestra conductor. The instruments are being played by the students. The instructor shouldn't also be an instrument player. They should stand back and do some course correction, give some real-time feedback. But really what happens in that classroom is that the students now are engaging in the material, and then this is where the learning science comes in, through very specific and intentionally designed activities. So things like breakouts, where they go into small groups and they talk to each other and they problem solve real time. Things like debates, quizzes, all of these things are really woven into a very interesting process over 60, 90, 120 minutes. It's thought about very intentionally beforehand. So the instructional designer, the teacher, they're saying, okay, if I start and I do a plenary, so I'm going to frame the class with a plenary, then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make them connect to what they learned in the homework. So I'm going to do ask people to speak to the reading, or I'm going to send them into a breakout to scenario play or role play something. And then I'm going to bring them back in. I'm going to check their understanding again. And then I'm going to have them do a quiz. And, and you think about all this beforehand with the intention of really saying they've internalized the information before the class. They've come into class and they've applied the information, their understanding and their interpretation of it in real time. They've gotten feedback from their peers. You're sophisticating their understanding a little bit. You start turning the dial from 0 to 1. Then they go home. They get feedback from the instructor on how well they did. They think about it a bit more. They reflect a bit more. They do some more homework. They come back and apply it again. They've gone from a 1 to a 2, and then to a 3, to a 4, to a 5. And by the end of the semester, you've systemically sort of embedded that knowledge in their mind. Another very critical component of learning science is the need for cross-contextual application of knowledge. Knowledge today, across the board in most institutions, is taught and applied in context. So you have medical examples with medical terminology in a medical environment with medical professionals, and you'll become a really good doctor, right? But you are not taught how to apply that knowledge intentionally and systemically across discipline. How do you apply the core skills that you've learned in medicine to your taxes, to your relationship, to your community, to your happiness, right? And that's a big problem. And so, people learn to apply across context through trial and error, probably through a lot of error. By the time you're in your 30s or even 40s, you get pretty good at saying, okay, what I know here, I could apply there. But, it's because they were never taught. If you were not taught to intentionally identify a process to transfer knowledge across domain, you won't be able to do it. In Minerva, the way that we address that is we apply and teach knowledge across context. And so we will say, for example, one of the skills we teach is right problem. Right problem is the ability to really discern what the real problem is before you waste half your time solving something tangential. And then through that process, I really should have been looking over here rather than over there. And as I said, in the beginning, through a lot of error mainly, but trial and error, we make mistakes. Mentors, supervisors, family, don't do it that way, do it this way. And then through repetition and doing it over and over, we get better at it. And eventually we're like, right, this is where I need to look. It's called experience nowadays, right? Or even intuition. But you can teach it really intentionally. And so one of the ways that we show right problem is we say, class 1, day 1, this is right problem. This is a definition. This is an example. Let's practice it. And then every week, we start to allow them to interact deeper with that material. But we also demonstrate it or show it across disciplines. So they'll see right problem in math, right problem in English, right problem in history. It's a universally applicable and transferable skill, right? And I want to repeat that. The entire first year of Minerva, all the students take the same program, same courses, and then they branch off into their major from the second, third, and fourth year. And in that first year, we're teaching them a set of universally applicable and transferable skills. These skills are applicable to any discipline, regardless of where they go, such as right problem. You need to know right problem for everything, basically, right? It's a contemporary 21st, 22nd century skill. But you can't just learn right problem in math or in philosophy. You got to learn it across all these disciplines. And then another interesting thing that we do in Minerva Schools is over the 4 years that they are with us, they live in 7 cities around the world. They move as a group. So they live in San Francisco in the first year. They go to Seoul and Hyderabad in the second year, Berlin and Buenos Aires in the third year, London and Taipei in the fourth year, and they come back to San Fran to graduate.
That's incredible.
It's going to be a little bit, yeah, it's really, really funky and fun, but there's a very specific educational reason for that, because that same problem I told you about, right problem, that same skill, applying right problem in Bangalore and Hyderabad, India, versus in Berlin, versus in Buenos Aires is completely different, right? Now, if we had taught them right problem on a test and they understood the skill, they would have had to wait till they graduated and then applied it for the next 5-10 years of their lives. And then by their 30s, they'll figure it out. By the time a Minerva graduates in their senior year, they've applied this thing across multiple subject matters, intentionally over 4 years, and across 7 cities around the world. So now what happens is whenever they encounter a situation that requires them to recall that skill, irrespective of where a job interview, a relationship, making a decision on a house, they will be able to recall that like it'll be muscle memory. And it's because of the way that we taught them. So that's I gave you a pretty broad insight into some of the learning science, but just to recap, There is the ability to engage in synchronous peer-based instruction with real-time feedback. That's really important, and consistent ongoing feedback. The need to define learning outcomes very clearly, and then to scaffold those learning outcomes across the curriculum. So you're seeing them popping up very intentionally in different places that is interwoven like a beautiful tapestry. The ability to apply these concepts not only in the classroom, but in the environment, in different cities, in different types of situations and whatnot. And then the global mindset by allowing them to live around the world and grow up, just to become a global citizen by literally being in these types of environments. And those are four really fundamental concepts that have allowed Minerva to stand apart. A lot of institutions do this in pockets and isolated ways. What Minerva has been able to do is to put it together in a really well-working system. And then the results speak for themselves. These students are incredible. Their grad school placements, their job placements, their standardized testing is through the charts. And so it's working. It's working really well, actually.
Clearly. And honestly, so many of the things that you just mentioned resonate with me as someone who has really embraced innovation and entrepreneurialism. One of the things you touched on initially before we even got into the science that was further highlighted by them traveling the world is the power of diversity, which it seems like Minerva takes very seriously. For me, my high school was 95% white in a upper middle class neighborhood where everyone, obviously we all have had our personal life experiences, but for me going away to college, and even I did a few weeks abroad in college, it was incredible to me how many new perspectives I was able to hear just from talking to people, not only of different like races, but people of different socioeconomic classes, which you delved into. And then when I went abroad, talking to people from the outside, talking about American politics from their perspectives, from the outside looking in, I heard perspectives that I had never even conceived before. So I think that ties in really nicely with having them go into breakout groups and really discuss things from like these completely different backgrounds. They're hearing so many different perspectives rather than the same ones from the same people in the same place kind of story. So it seems to me that the diversity seems like such a crucial component of people being able to apply their skills in various ways and places.
Yeah, no doubt. I think, as you were speaking, I just remember a few things in my past. One, I always remember a former boss of mine saying, friction allows for progress. If you have two materials, he was an engineer. You have two materials with no friction on them, they'll just continue to spin. It's only when there's spin. If only there's friction, right, then you can get movement. And diversity, in a sense, allows for friction, for different viewpoints to collide and for some movement to happen out of that. I mean, I used to work in traditional higher ed before joining Minerva. I worked in a large public institution spread across the Caribbean. And I always used to say to people, I'm from Trinidad. You put 10 Trinis in a room talking about Trini problems and they'll have a Trini solution. It'll stay the same. You'll have status quo for the rest of your life. You have to have distinct opinions, distinct perspectives to come into the mix, to shake things up, to challenge, things that you take for granted, to see things that nobody else is seeing. And so diversity, not just physiological diversity, but intellectual and emotional diversity is really important. And that is not, achieved simply by ensuring that you have students from across the world. It's the diversity of the curriculum, it's the diversity of the locations. Just to be clear, these kids don't move individually around the world, they move as a cohort. So when you come in with a freshman class, you and your colleagues and your classmates are moving as a group to these 7 cities. And so you're building fascinating relationships where you're in these fish bowls where you can do fascinating things together and then go to a new city. And, imagine going from Seoul, South Korea to Hyderabad, India in your second year. The difference, new world energy, dynamism in Asia, going to Hyderabad, which is a tech city in India, but very different culture. I mean, couldn't be polar opposite, right? And you are interacting with subject matter that's consistent across all these locations, but you're getting these diversity of locations are challenging your viewpoints on the subject matter. So you might have thought you knew right problem in Seoul, and then you get to Hyderabad, and then after that you go to Berlin, and you're like, I thought I knew this already, right? It's completely different. So you really, the issue of intellectual, emotional diversity, social, cultural diversity is a core component of being able to be confident as a human being able to be effective as a citizen of the world, to be able to engage people, to be able to be empathetic and understand. I think too often we teach knowledge as an absolute. So if I got it, I got it, and now I'm an expert. In a world in which we live today, where via these devices, there's more knowledge stored in there, and you have access to more knowledge than any human being could ever have. the paradigm has shifted from the teacher professing absolute knowledge to the teacher really enabling a process of knowledge discovery. You're really trying to create decision-making tools and frameworks rather than saying this is absolute knowledge. And that's really what Minerva is trying to do at a very broad level.
It's another super profound statement, and it ties into something else that we could have recorded the first conversation we had, just but something that comes to mind from there. The Montessori schools are some of the more famous, or I guess private schools for like K through 12 here in the United States. And I read this book. I can't remember the name at the moment, but pretty much the core philosophy of the book was the power of being able to question things and asking super powerful questions. And some of the people like Jeff Bezos went to them. I'm pretty sure Mark Zuckerberg might have went to them. They're taught to challenge the status quo. Rather, so going to these different places, speaking to people from varying backgrounds, traveling to places elsewhere, it makes you realize that no matter how much you might retain from reading a textbook or something, there's so much that you don't know that you can be inquisitive about and try to know. So that ties in very much to a professor saying, this is A, B, and C, this is reality, like deal with it, rather to, this is my interpretation of A. How do you feel about that? What are your questions in response to that? That's the key to kind of, I think, embed in the youth, especially these days where it's like a social media screen will really make it seem like your status quo is the norm. Being able to challenge that is so important.
And I should clarify, like the professor saying this is A, this is B, this is C. There's legitimacy in that because there is knowledge that we know is correct, right? That being said, I think a big question on curriculum is that relevant? Is that important? Like, honestly, I have 2 young kids, and if they don't need to know, deep calculus theories, or they need to understand the concepts of mathematics, understand the logic that comes to it, understand interconnectivity, but don't necessarily teach them their 45 times tables to teach them logic, right? Teach them the fundamentals. What is the A, what is the B, what is the C? But then there's other types of information that they can be taught, other ways of teaching that information that will allow them to be much more contemporary. And really, in the Montessoris and really, it's not even the Montessoris, in the best schools of the world, or even in not the best schools, the best professors, the best teachers, like you, I guarantee you, if I ask you to tell me how many of your professors made a profound impact on your life, it'll be less than 5. It'll be 4, 2, 3. I know them offhand. There was this guy in one of my master's programs, my master's degree, a professor from London Business School. There was a guy in my undergraduate degree in California, and there was a couple of professors in high school. And the reason why is that they didn't just engage me in a way that sort of kept the classroom interesting, but they excited my imagination. They uplifted me. They gave me a sense of self and a sense of purpose. Not that it wasn't about A's and B's. It was that, you're opening your mind to the world and understanding not just the realm of possibility, but more importantly, the fact that you can have the confidence that you're getting the tools and experiences to be able to interact with that realm of possibility on your own terms. And that's what the Montessoris and the other schools do really well. They build a sense of intellectual strength and a sense of self inside you. And it's fascinating because, if you dig deep into the people that have changed the world and the people that have impacted on the world, it's not their university education per se, as we've seen in the Silicon Valley, right? It's their elementary and high school and their home environment that's had an even more profound impact than the specific knowledge that they might have learned in an engineering degree, for example.
Definitely. I think teaching entrepreneurial values and that ability to question the status quo are 2 of the most profound things that I was grateful to learn. I did end up learning it my parents are both entrepreneurs, so they kind of instilled that in me as a kid, and college was kind of able to elevate that a little bit. But having just that inquisitive sense, like I was saying before, I think makes such a huge difference. So it's great to hear that places are starting to really integrate that into education everywhere. That being said, another point that I wanted to touch on a little bit, and I was hoping maybe you could expand on it a little further, is that ability to take lessons from one area of expertise and apply them in a completely different area of expertise. I can't remember the exact phrasing that you used, but I wanted to see if you could maybe expand on how an ordinary person who's not involved in Minerva could kind of use that approach of, okay, I studied engineering. My boss is a prime example. My boss studied engineering in college, and now he does search engine optimization, which is like sprucing up people's websites so that they rank higher on Google. And he says all the time, even though he didn't use his engineering degree, having that engineering mindset has been so critical in him scaling this SEO stuff that he works on to a completely different level. So can you touch on how somebody could kind of apply that approach?
Yeah, sure. I mentioned a few terms earlier, which I think are relevant here. First is there are certain skills and perspectives that are universal. They're universally applicable, and they can be applied across everything, basically. And so let's look at that engineering degree for SEO, right? What would he have learned? He would have learned logical progression, a value chain. If you do this, it has that impact. If you do that, it has that impact, right? So the ability to think logically and systemically, irrespective of the material, engineers are really good at that, right? That's first. The second thing is that he would have learned the value of cause and effect, right? And really understand that if you do something, it provides a certain realm of possibility. And we could go on and on. But there's things that he learned inside there that, you know, at the superficial layer or the visible layer, it's about engineering, but there's a universality of concept somewhere embedded inside there. And now, unfortunately, education doesn't approach it that. It just approaches it at the superficial level. This is an engineering concept, to learn it as an engineer and apply it as an engineer. How we do it in Minerva is through everything I said earlier, right? The way we design the curriculum, the way we deliver it, the global rotation and whatnot. But not, you know, how could it be applied in an everyday environment? And I would say a couple of things. It comes from a diversity of experiences, first of all, right? The thing is, I think if you, as a young aspiring entrepreneur today, want to be able to develop, you know, the skill set to be able to identify, exploit opportunity in a systemic way, the first thing you have to be able to do is to see the opportunity. And the only way you're going to be able to see the opportunity is if you have multiple lenses on, right? Not just one pair of glasses. Now, so I think a diversity of life experiences is at the core of this, right? And that can come from, you know, learning to crochet to traveling the world. It doesn't matter, right? I think the way that you should approach it is that every single thing you do is an opportunity to expand your perspective, to put on a different set of lenses, right? Go learn to salsa dance. I'll just give you an example. I used to be a consultant, a management consultant, working in a big multinational. And we were doing a job here in Trinidad to restructure the health department, the Ministry of Health. Massive 2-year job, really complicated, thousands of people impacting. And, you know, we were looking at research on how people approach innovation in healthcare. We came across this example. There was a hospital somewhere in the US that was having a lot of deaths in its emergency room. People were coming in, and the amount of deaths compared to other hospitals, it was too high. And they brought in healthcare consultants and other doctors, and nobody could solve this problem. Like, nobody could figure out what it was. And eventually, some consulting company that they were working with said, we're going to bring in a Formula One pit crew. I'm like, what? Formula One pit crew? And so, you know, think about it, right? A Formula One pit crew understands process. If they understand nothing, it's process. Under 2 seconds to change 4 tires, put gas, and then get you out. It is, you know, the most refined process you could possibly imagine. And they brought in this Formula One pit crew, and they looked at it and they said it was a configuration problem. It was the time things were taking to happen. There was infection happening because things were passing through the wrong places. So they physically reconfigured the process flow. But this is the difference in perspective. It took a Formula One pit crew to teach a medical facility how to prevent deaths through process. Now, if that doesn't teach you about entrepreneurialism, I think the answer is to get a diversity of experiences, intellectual, social, life experiences that will allow you or build in you the habit of trying to see things in a different manner, or seeing things that not everybody else sees. I think if you start to get that right, there's a lot of training out there. You can learn how to do a business plan and a marketing plan and how to manage your company. That's the easy part, I think. It's really the perspectives and your view on the world that will really differentiate you from your peers and allow you to again, understand and exploit something that nobody else has done before.
That Formula One story, wow, like that. What an inspiring story. But tying it back into my personal experience thus far, I'm thinking of it from this perspective of, like, throughout the entirety of my collegiate experience, the most the best learning that I got was outside of the classroom. So it was my jobs that I was able to acquire, my internships. It was studying abroad. So it's for me personally, I could totally understand how the experiences are so crucial. And now you're just making me, I've been eager to travel with coronavirus going on. Now I'm like, now I'm getting even more eager to get back out there. So speaking of coronavirus, I would like to kind of take a step into current events. How have you seen the education landscape transition during coronavirus, and how do you see education shifting in the future as a result of what's going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a seismic shift, and I think the implications of which we haven't yet fully felt. What has happened is that, you know, it happened in stages. In the first stage, it was crisis management, right? Oh, damn, oh, snap. What do I do tomorrow morning? How do I get these students to finish their semester? And so it was crisis management, basically. And I think also from the student side, they knew that it was a crisis, and so they settled. They just took whatever sort of came at them. Even in the midst of that, though, you had situations where some of the top schools in the world that charge, you know, 60 grand a year in tuition, students were saying, I'm not paying 60 grand for Zoom, even if it's for 2 weeks, right? And so there was some tension, there was some uneasiness in the early, you know, you had institutions that kind of were in crisis mode for the spring. During the summer, they tried to recalibrate. The significant majority just doubled down on what they did in the spring, which I think is a fundamental mistake. And I could dig into that a bit deeper afterwards. Some used it to pivot. Some used it to say, well, you know, we're not going to try and say we're going to have the semester online, or we're going to go to Thanksgiving. This next academic year is shot. It's going to be virtual. We need to have a profound solution or a substantial solution for our students. So they didn't just say, we're going to try and continue to do what we were doing. We're going to try and train our people better. We're going to try and get better technology, something like that. And then there's a very, very small minority, less than 5, 4, maybe even less than 1%, that said, this is the pivot. This is the opportunity. We've all known that this was coming. It just got accelerated. And so I knew that I had to transform and accelerate the transformation. So I'm going to recalibrate. And I can give you some examples of a few different ones that we're working with that have done all three. For the students, you know, they put up with it in the spring. They were super uncertain and uneasy. And there's a lot of fear around what would happen in the fall during the summer. And then they came back to class. We've seen enrollment numbers go down across the board, not just in higher ed, but in community colleges as well. Everybody thought community college numbers would go up. People would proxy and just go and take a class or two at their local community college. Some data came out last week that said their enrollment is down 7.5% across the college sector, wow, which is surprising because it's much more affordable and accessible and relevant and practical. And even that didn't work. We've seen numbers go up in gap years, gap semesters, non-traditional approaches, stackable certificates, coding certificates. All those numbers have skyrocketed. What does that tell you, right? And then the semester started, and you know, you've had this astonishing situation. I mean, I'm sitting in the Caribbean looking at the US, for example, and you had all these colleges that brought kids back to campus with the inevitability of coronavirus. And I say inevitability because nobody did not know what would have happened. When you put
so apparent
2,000 kids on a campus, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 kids, what's going to happen, man? And then you're going to have to send them back home. And then they're going to have infections and then community spread. And so it's really created a lot of uneasiness. Like I spend my days speaking to university leaders, and there is so much uncertainty still. Like, of course, there will be a vaccine soon. Things will get back to normal. But I think the big shift has happened not in the schools themselves, but the students and their families. My gut feeling is that people are saying, listen, man, Miles, it might be great from a networking perspective to go to a top Ivy League, for example, or a top Russell Group in the UK. There's examples. I survived taking classes online. This is not as painful as I thought it would be. Why don't I go to people that can teach online really well, or that there's programs or content that is really relevant to today? And then, you know, when you start to see big tech coming in and offering short-term certificates, so I'll use Google again because it got a lot of press, but they're not the only one. There's a number of others that are playing in this mix right now, where Google has said there are Google certifications that you can take via Coursera, edX, or one of them, that they will count as a university degree. It's a 6-month certification. that they will count as a university degree. So if I'm a high schooler now, graduating and coming out and saying, well, I could spend $500,000 over the next 4 years and be part of a wonderful alumni association, or I can spend 6 months and get a $150,000 starting salary, right? Maybe I can go back to college later. Are there other ways of me that, you can't discount the social, emotional growth. There's a lot of, and to be very clear, I think that the future of place-based institutions is strong. I don't think it's dead at all. They have to recalibrate. They have to have new offerings. They have to, incorporate technology, use the physical space in a much more substantial way, create making spaces, create innovation spaces, create labs, put 3D printers everywhere. Basically anybody that's gone to Google or Facebook or one of these companies that you look at how their offices are run, right? There's a few cubicles because people need to sort of have a home base, but it's co-working spaces. It's kitchenettes and meeting rooms and labs, and that's, and really, so the place-based really should be shifting towards engagement and collaboration, as we do, for example, in our virtual classroom, but then we send kids to these cities to actually interact and engage in these. Those are our laboratories in a sense, right? That's where the future lies. And therefore the challenge is how do you create curriculum and deliver curriculum to marry with that, not to compete with it, not to overlap with it, but so that they become two sides of the same coin. And I don't think that message, to be very clear, has been understood. There's such an entrenched historical interest in the status quo in higher education that the very significant majority are just waiting. They're in hibernation. They're waiting for coronavirus to disappear, and then they'll go back to the old. And then they will incrementally evolve. They might put a few more courses online, maybe, and whatnot. But the fundamental DNA of the institutions have not changed. And then there's a lot of research, even pre-COVID, to say that by the year 2030, 60% of American higher education institutions will be dead, and all kinds of big figures have been thrown out there. And my perspective is that COVID has just sped that up by like 4 or 5 years. By 2025, the higher education landscape is going to be substantially different than it is now, globally, not just in the US.
Substantially different. And you agree that that they call it like the college bubble? Do you think that that's reality? Do you see a substantial amount of these institutions closing, or do you just see them managing to adapt in the way that you mentioned previously?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, my personal opinion on this is that it's going to get commoditized. There's going to be a businessification, if it's such a word, of higher education. You're going to see a lot of mergers and acquisition. You're starting to see it already. The other day, University of Arizona bought an online school that wasn't doing very well, but that gave them online capability, and now they're using it to drive. You saw Kaplan was bought by Purdue to create Purdue Global Online.
Interesting.
You're seeing little things happening there, and I think, I won't mention the institution, but a very well-known one that bought an online provider. I spoke to the person, we were talking with them about a collaboration, and they were telling us a story. The reason they bought that online provider is because they tried to do it twice in-house, 3 times in-house, and it failed. And they're like, we're either not going to do this, or we're just going to acquire somebody who knows how to do it really well, right? And so the path of least resistance is go out and do M&A, marriages. The other thing that you might see in the short term is consortia. So you'll see similar institutions creating like common courses where, one course for students from 10 institutions, they're using the best professors, they're delivering online. These are all short term, right? So I think there will be some marriages, there will be some deaths, right? The college bubble, there definitely, there is already. I mean, you're seeing during the summer some layoffs where institutions are laying off 500 here, 1,000 there, and whatnot. And fortunately, the American economy is a strong economy overall. It goes up and it goes down, but there's things like government bailouts and whatnot, but that can't be sustained over the long term, right? Let's take a big zoom out. There's been a referendum on higher education. A lot of institutions have been sort of deemed as insufficient or lacking. And the question is now boils down to leadership, community. Does the community understand the implications of what's happening? And are they willing to pivot? There's a lot of special interests. Like if I'm a professor who's been teaching the same way for the last 30 years, it's really hard for me to shift, right, at this stage. But, if you don't pivot now, the sands are ticking, right? And so I imagine that we'll see a few stages of evolution. You'll start to see some short-term casualties, some medium-term pivots, and then, as I said, around 2025 or thereafter, you're going to start to see the landscape shifting quite considerably towards hybridized models where to survive in the world of education, you're going to have you have to expand access, first of all. And that's where virtual comes in, right? I mean, I'll tell you right now, we're talking to a number of some of the world's best institutions. They're all thinking very carefully about how to create sophisticated online to provide more access. So if, let's say if Harvard decides, Harvard HBS, Harvard Business School, right? They're accessible to the extent, but they're expensive and whatnot. But they have a pipeline going around the block, around 10 blocks, right? If they decide now to create a Harvard Business School Lite and open that up to the masses, in the Caribbean, all the business schools are dead. Everybody's going to take Harvard Business School online, and every business school here will be left wanting, right? And they're not thinking about that. I can tell you that. They're still, thinking very narrowly. So it's going to be really interesting. Of course, none of us has that crystal ball, but the signs are pointing in this direction. And I do feel that there's going to be, those that are entrepreneurial and that have the ability to take risk, right, are the ones that will be able to survive and thrive in the future.
Super interesting. Another thing that popped in my head as you were chatting right now, what do you think about the possibility of like extending like branch campuses elsewhere? I listened to Andrew Yang spoke with Scott Galloway on his podcast, which Andrew Yang is actually how I found Minerva. So shout out to him. He's one of my favorites. But in that episode, Scott Galloway was saying that one of the issues that he's identified, and he works at NYU, so he's like admittedly a cog in the machine, but he just talks about how the acceptance rate at these schools makes it impossible for like the masses to really benefit from these incredible institutions. So he like kind of called out Harvard, like Harvard's building a Shanghai campus. Like, why not build it in Detroit or Baltimore or like one of the Dakotas, somewhere that could really benefit from it? Do you see that being a possibility as well with that hybridization, where it's like Harvard would open a campus in a city that could really benefit from having an institution like Harvard, like right up the road?
Yeah, that's interesting. No, I think that's the old model. I think building buildings for institutions is dead. Building co-working spaces. Could I see a shared Ivy League facility in each city where all the Ivy Leagues are allowing people to come in and interact with their programs in a different way? I'll tell you right now, we're speaking to a well-known engineering school in the country, one of the top, and they're talking about, so everybody knows how Tesla sells their cars. You go into a shopping mall and there's a small store and you can play with a Tesla. And this organization is talking about doing something similar for higher education. We're making it physically super accessible with specialists on site, but then with the virtual world to back it up, right? So you could be taking your classes from wherever and you're stuck and you want to interact with somebody, and you can go to like the equivalent of a Starbucks and meet with a professor, right? Student happiness, student engagement is equally important. You could be teaching gospel, man, but if you don't teach it in a way that makes it exciting and energizing, I'll go somewhere else. If I'm going to suffer, I could suffer as cheaply as possible. That's really the game right now, right? And so it's a race to the bottom in price and whatnot. That being said, we talked about diversity earlier, right? Education is inaccessible. Quality education is inaccessible. Education in general is inaccessible. Quality is even less accessible. And, the institutions of the world, especially the sophisticated ones like the Harvard, they can make a really profound impact if they were serious. Like, they have knowledge and expertise and experience and history the whole world could benefit from. And it's not. And it's part of the business model right now, right? It's keep it exclusive, have a long line of demand, then you can charge $1 bazillion for it. That's dead, man. The future of education is open access. The future of education is experiential and engaging and community-based, right? And relevant. This has to be contemporary. And so the proxy is like, right now, the cost of college is expensive because we bundle everything in. When you're paying tuition, you're paying for the air conditioning and the janitor and the ivy on the walls and the special new building that needs to be staffed with a front desk attendant and the computer. Those days are dead. Like at Minerva, I didn't mention this earlier, but our cost all in is a fraction, living in 7 cities around the world, than these Ivy Leagues, and we're more difficult to get into than them, just in our own school. Point being there that it doesn't have to be expensive to be good, right? It can be really good and be accessible. And I think the world is realizing and waking up to that. But I don't want to skew this conversation to the top end of the spectrum. We should really be focusing on the bottom end of the spectrum. There are so many people in the current situation that are suffering, are uncertain, are losing their jobs. And could you imagine if access to high quality, affordable education was there for them right now, people could pivot, right? I mean, we all know the world in which we live today. Um, they say, I think, like the average college student changes their major like 3-5 times or something like that. We're being built, we're being manufactured to be dynamic now, no longer to be static. And so education is the same way. Education is going to be lifelong now, right? And you'll have the ability in your 40s, 50s, 60s to learn coding, to learn data science, to learn web design, to do, web optimization, the things that you do. You can do it. And especially back to the diversity conversation, if you bring in really unique perspectives, imagine a doctor learning to code. Imagine the kinds of things that could happen there, right? But we don't encourage that. That's not the norm. That's the exception by far. So both from making sure that everybody has access to quality and strong education, through to creating the ability for people to articulate a life based upon the ability to pivot and sort of, take risk and take chances in a substantial way. That's where education needs to go. How long it'll take to get there, your guess is as good as mine. But there's positive signs. There's positive signs that those kinds of things are happening. I mean, I know that, for example, the bootcamp world is on fire right now. A lot of organizations are pivoting and creating boot camps, trying to make affordable boot camps. Shout out to organizations like SNHU and WGU and those kinds that are doing fantastic things to make high quality education accessible to the average person.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that it's super imperative that that places like that continue to flourish, and that people get that access to education that has become such an exclusive thing, especially here in the United States. The costs are just getting insurmountable, especially these colleges like my girlfriend, for example. Her tuition went up for these these online classes. It's just, I don't understand how they can justify that and think that the students are going to be okay with it. So it's really great.
Just to say, they have no choice, because you have to understand they have this cost structure of, plant, people, expenses, whatever, right? And then online education, they couldn't get rid of the physical plant.
Yeah, their costs are still there.
So it's just another layer of cost on top of the existing cost basis. And this is the point, right? If that's the way that you behave, you're just going to wait to get rid of that additional cost and go back, because you have this fundamental cost structure. And the real organizations that understand this will try to remove some costs, will pivot, will repurpose their plant, will reskill their people. But that's not happening at the scale it should be happening.
Unfortunately not. It's kind of interesting. These places that are supposed to teach you how to innovate and question the status quo have just been so deeply rooted in their own status quo, to the point where they're like, we don't really need to prepare to fail, because we're going to have students coming every year to live in the dorms no matter what. But coronavirus was like, nope, time to switch things up.
But therein lies a fundamental hypocrisy of education, right? Where you're telling people to behave and think in a certain way, and you as an organization don't do it. You got to walk the walk, man. You can't just
do as I say, not as I do kind of philosophy there.
Absolutely. And that is, I think, it's not just education is at the core of who we are as human beings, right? And if you think about this really deeply, coronavirus is forcing a referendum on education, but there's going to be a massive impact on humankind as well. And how we come out of the back end of this, the new perspectives that we gain, I think people will be a lot less comfortable accepting the status quo and the norm. And, the optimist in me will say that people will realize that I have much more power and much more control in how my life unfolds. I don't have to just go to high school, get a college degree, get a nice paying job and continue. That model is now proven irrelevant.
No doubt. I've already heard more and more people saying that they're less concerned with whether a student has a college degree. And a lot of it, I think, ties into just the value of real world experience. So if I can go out and work at an internship right out of college or right out of high school for free, get that experience, learn about the industry that I want to be in, that holds weight too, So it's definitely, we're going to start to see that paradigm, especially now. Another thing that episode with Andrew Yang and Scott Galloway talked about was like big tech's pretty much bound to jump into the education space next, just based on like the rate of innovation in other industries and how far behind education has gotten. It's like, it's kind of inevitable that companies as big as Facebook and Amazon and all those guys like it's too big to ignore. It's such a giant market with pretty decent margins of return for them. It makes sense that they're pretty much bound to to jump in and start doing what like Google did with those certifications.
Well, it started a while back. In 2018, I took a study tour of the business school here in Trinidad to the Valley. And we visited Facebook and we visited Google and a few others. And, you know, the message was loud and clear: hire for sort of attitude, train for skills. They'll train you, they'll upskill you, they'll retrain you. I know some young Trinidadians that are working at both those organizations, and they come in and do one job and they work on that for 12 months or so. And then they want to do something else and the company retrains them, you know, and there's the internal learning and development capacity of these organizations. It's mission critical for them. So they've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in building internal capacity and then working with other institutions to retrain. But that's their, you know, that's part of their value proposition now, right? And when I think the big pivot didn't happen during Corona, it happened when a few years ago, big tech removed a college degree as an entrance requirement. So you could come in with a high school diploma, a high school degree, and then you're a kick-ass coder and you could show what you've done, they'll hire you. And you know, that was the big pivot where they were saying to the world, you know, is it really relevant that you have a liberal arts degree or even an engineering degree, for example? And it's not that those things are not relevant, but what is being, you know, what's being delivered right now is not relevant. And back to the issue about the need for change. So there is, it's really interesting to see how the disruption will be not driven, but will be influenced by big tech. But I really feel like when you zoom even further back out at the societal level, at the national level, like countries are thinking really deeply about this. And you see places like Singapore and the Scandinavian countries, even Finland in particular, like how they've recalibrated K-12. They haven't recalibrated higher ed. They know that to shift their societies, to pivot into the future, that's where you got to start. That's where you shift mindsets completely. You reap the benefit 12, 15 years out. But, you know, I heard a saying some time ago, be an old man that plants a tree. And I was like, eh? What does that mean? Well, I'm never going to benefit from that if I'm an old man, but generations will benefit from that, right? And those countries are planting trees right now. And I think that's really important to pay attention to as well. It's not just big tech, but societies and countries and even regions like the European Union and whatnot are doing some really interesting things to try and shift education systems.
It's fascinating. I'm not sure. Is the United States doing a good job of shifting the public education, or there's still room for growth there?
Well, you know, I'm no expert in the U.S. education system, but I will say this: it's one of the more sophisticated systems in the world. It's one of the more invested industries, right? There's no doubt that, you know, there's a lot of complexity. When you think about federal and state and community, and just in the high school market, we're playing there now, and it's fascinating to understand the complexities in there. But education in America, to a large extent, especially higher education, is seen as a global leader, right? America has done a lot that the rest of the world is catching up to. But is it responding as effectively? I would say no. From my perspective, you know, there could be more leadership. There could be more innovation and sort of driven leadership. And I'm not seeing that as much right now. So I don't know. I think the jury's out. Let's see. America is a tremendously resilient place. And there's so much happening. Look what's happening on the political front right now. Anything can happen by the end of the year.
The next couple months.
Yeah.
Better strap in.
When you come back to colleges and universities, like a lot of colleges said, we're going to go back to campus until Thanksgiving. We're going to send kids back home. And now some are having to send kids home early and whatnot. So stay tuned. This thing is still, we're in the middle of this. Like
it's not over. Not even close.
Nobody should be under the impression that, okay, by fall of 2021, it's going to be back to normal, right? I mean, if you think about it from a health perspective, even if they were to produce a drug, test it, they have to mass produce it. It has to move around to everybody. You're only as strong as your weakest link. If one person has it, and if, you know, people are not, everybody's not vaccinated, then it will continue to spread. And somebody told me the other day, COVID is like a boomerang. It's here and it goes and it comes right back around, and you're seeing these waves. And now you're going into the cold months, and it's a disease that affects the pulmonary system and whatnot. So, you know, overall, stay tuned. Let's see how this.
Yeah, we're not over with this thing yet. It's it's in progress.
Yeah, for sure.
As we wind down, I've had such a wonderful time chatting with you. This conversation is exactly why I started the podcast. It's so inspiring. But to kind of conclude, I always like to ask if there's a particular quote or philosophy that has been tried and true throughout your life that you would like to share.
Oh, that's good. Thanks, man. Thanks for throwing me off guard.
Yeah, take your time to answer it.
Yeah,
I
no.
always kind of put people on the spot with this one.
Yeah, no, that's good. I like it. That's good. My background's pretty interesting. Just in a nutshell, my father was a diplomat for Trinidad, so I grew up moving around the world. I lived in Canada, in England, and India. I went to high school in India, which I think was probably one of the most profound experiences. Lived in the U.S.
So
and
cool.
now I live in Trinidad. I have a pretty diverse personal and professional background. I'm an athlete. I played soccer all the way through college. I
Oh,
coached.
very cool.
I'm a musician. My whole family is musicians. So I'm a drummer. I used to sing. I played the trumpet. So, I was talking about diversity of experiences to have an entrepreneurial mindset. I lived that, right? And I was a big part of who I am today. And then I went on to have careers both in management consulting and higher ed. And one of the things that I realized, I think, at the end of the day, systems, processes, rules, strategies doesn't achieve anything. People achieve anything. People are at the center of everything. And, in the diversity of experiences and the diversity of engagements that I've had with people around the world, I realized two fundamental concepts. Never judge a book by its cover. Don't predetermine. Allow a situation to unfold and happen. Just because you've experienced something 10 times doesn't mean the 11th time it's going to go the same way. So a humility, an infinite humility to say, I don't know. I have an intuition. I might have an idea, but I don't know. And I'll always not know. And then secondly, to value and respect that each person is an individual. You never know what they're going through. You never know what's behind the veneer. And so to give people respect and room, in a sense, right? Whenever I manage teams and manage people, I worked with a lot of younger people over the years as well. It's about exciting their imagination and giving them a sense of self, right? And if you can do that, you can't impact on the knowledge that they gain. They've learned that through their education system, the community that they come from. What you can do is give them a sense that you are profound, you are powerful, you can do things, and then excite them about the future. Show them the field that they could play in, right? Show them the realm of possibility. And so a lot of my time spent as a leader has been to excite people's imagination and uplift them. And that's the secret to my success. If I can do that, like I'm the kind of leader that says, I don't have to be visible. The more invisible I am, the better I'm doing my job, right? And in order to do that, I have to uplift you and remove roadblocks. And then just excite you and let you go as a human being. So I think that's really important. And, I shifted to working in the Silicon Valley in a sense last January when I joined Minerva. Before that, I had 140 direct reports. I managed 7 offices. I sat on 3 boards.
Wow.
And then I came into Minerva with a much more narrow focus. And I went from managing many, many, many people to now working with a much smaller team. And it was a big shift for me, but the principles remained very much the same. And I realized that whole San Francisco Valley mentality is about that. It's about valuing the skills and perspectives that the person brings, not just hiring them and then telling them what to do, but really enabling them and allowing them to do. And the most successful entrepreneurs that we've seen in that environment are the ones that can, as we said earlier, really identify personality and skill set more than skills. Skill comes on a piece of paper. So here's my resume. I can do these 10 things. But you can't explain, personality and that kind of stuff. And really creating an environment to allow people to thrive like that is a really exciting thing. And so to pivot a bit away from my philosophy, it's what makes Minerva also so successful, because we have incredible people on our team that have been brought from the private sector, from education sector and whatnot. And the things that we're able to do, despite being very lean and relatively young, is incredible, but it's because of the culture that we built internally. So culture is key.
You're practicing what you preach.
Absolutely. Trying to, man.
Yeah, it sounds like you're doing a good job. Well, Sharran, this has been so much fun. That was a great way to conclude things. I think the power of people is something that, especially in this current day and age, is so crucial to hone in on and to value the people that are working with you is is the key. You can replace people, but it's expensive and it's problematic if it shifts the culture. So being able to identify that good company culture and really hitting home with the people that you work with is so imperative.
And just to add, doing it intentionally. Like a lot of companies, cultures evolve through time and get influenced by and flavored by the dominant personalities. But I think what we're learning in the world of entrepreneurialism and sort of innovation is that you have to intentionally design and build an innovation culture and an entrepreneurial culture. And there are certain fundamentals that you can build in from day one. And sometimes they may go against your own personal sort of comfort zone and whatnot, but that's what strong leadership is, right? Allowing things to happen that you're not comfortable with. And so, yeah, it's really exciting, the world in which we live today. And then, at a whole, despite some of the negativity and challenges in the education sector, this is a tremendous time for education, right? This is a renaissance in a sense where you're getting a chance to look in the mirror and make some difficult decisions.
Self-reflect.
Yeah.
You got to look at things with the silver lining. And I have no doubt that some great innovation will come as a result of these difficult times.
No doubt.
Well, thank you again for coming on, Sharon. It has been absolutely pleasure talking with you.
It's my pleasure. I really appreciate it. And to all your listeners and viewers out there, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks to anybody listening out there. I think this is one of the best episodes yet. So hopefully I can have you back.
Anytime.
Thanks again.